Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email me, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. Today, we discuss a delightful Patek Philippe Nautilus Moonphase. This is the 5712 1A-001. Launched back in 2006, it was the successor to the short-lived but pioneering 3712. So this Nautilus Moonphase in steel measures 40 millimeters in diameter. And as we rotate it through the camera, you can see it is quite thin. And this is my favorite feature of these watches, how thin they are. You could see in profile an easy watch to wear at 8.8 millimeters thick despite multiple complications and automatic winding. It is 44.4 from lug to lug, but if you measure the first end link on each side, and that is the way you're going to have to wear it. You can't wear it as a bare case. The total distance across is 48 millimeters, and I do love that the 5712 and the 5711 feel the same on the wrist. The quality of being very thin with a very supple bracelet. You lose that on the chronographs. On the chronograph dual time, you lose that on the annual calendar. This feels much more like a 5711 than it does those more complicated watches. You can see in steel, it fits nicely on my wrist. The watch is 40 millimeters if you measure it more or less this way or this way, about 42 if you measure it from 9 to 3. But on my wrist it wears well, and I would recommend it for a wrist as small as 14 centimeters circumference. The lugs are nowhere near the edge of my wrist, even over the top, which exaggerates the width of the watch. It's still well on board of the edge of my wrist on each side. And of course, I keep saying it's thin. It is thin, and with a ramped case flank that allows your sleeve to glide right over no matter how tight the sleeve. Gerald Genta designed the first Nautilus, the 3700, in 1976, and this watch is true to form. Integration of case into lugs into bracelet, and I'll say that the finishing of the case and the bracelet on a Nautilus goes a long way towards explaining why it costs more than an Aquanaut. Of course, there's also status and snob appeal and factors that are purely subjective and maybe even manipulative, but there's no doubting that the bracelet is more intricate and the case more complex, both in assembly and finishing, than what you find on, say, a 5167 1A, an Aquanaut with a bracelet. These are beautiful pieces. The bevel down the side, the tolerances between the individual links, polished intermediates, satin primaries, and this is something I wish we still had in the catalog, but today Patek Philippe bracelets do not include screws for removing or replacing removable links. All of these feature screws. Now you might ask, Tim, when was this watch made that it has screw-fixed removable links? Well, what I can tell you is that it was sold in 2012. When it was actually made, well, prior to sale, how much prior? I couldn't quite say, but it was sold in 2012. We have a double deployant clasp here, and then a clamshell lock to keep it closed. You can also see the use of ceramic spring-loaded pin snaps so that over time, the little clamshell lock cannot wear down these pin snaps. They cannot be worn down by steel. They're ceramic, so the tolerances will remain snappy. And you can also see, if you happen to be in between sizes with the removable links, there is a link and a half right here, so you have an intermediate sizing option. Rolling around to the case, screw down crown, 60 meters water resistant. It's fine for surface swimming. Just make sure you water test each year before swimming season starts. Pusher adjuster, of course, for the calendar system, as well as for the Moonphase. The watch features a complex case, beveling, satination, multiple facets to the bezel. You can see these wings are attached to the bezel. And then I've always thought that the Nautilus was a more coherent design than the Royal Oak, because on the Royal Oak you have this rounded polygon for the bezel, but then the inner bezel, the crystal, and the dial are all round. Here, the outer is the same shape as the inner, is the same shape as the crystal, is the same shape as the dial. We have white gold hands and indices on the dials. They won't tarnish or oxidize. There is actually a sunray motif in blue with a gradient fade from light at the center to dark at the edge, but it has the Nautilus's long-running and distinctive lateral striation. There's an azurage or concentric pattern inside the date with Moonphase, as well as inside the small seconds. And then we've got a power reserve indicator for the automatic winding, 48-hour power reserve. Of course, if you wish, you can wind it manually if you just want to see the power reserve in motion. And it is kind of fun to see. We'll do a Lume shot now. You can see this watch in the dark. Rolling around to the back, it's a 240 micro rotor. So the 240 micro rotors, generally in upscale Patek watches, more basic watches get a center rotor like a 315, a 324, or a 26 330. You get the micro rotor on the upscale stuff, generally complications. And it gives you the convenience of an automatic, but with the thin profile of a manual wind, and frankly also the attractive case-back view of a manual wind. Since we don't have a rotor and a winding bridge blocking the view, we have a 22 karat gold mass right here for optimal winding efficiency in conjunction with ceramic bearings for the same reason, efficiency, low friction. 3 hertz beat rate, free sprung balance. You can see that this one is 5-position adjusted, a high horology standard. The Gyromax free sprung balance means that it's very shock tolerant, and precise adjustment is done using these eccentric masses on the balance rim. It does feature Patek's Spiromax anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and again, a 48-hour power reserve when fully energized. Patek Philippe seal, you can see that right there. That was implemented about mid-2009. The finishing is a combination of manual and automated, but to a degree that feels more manual than automated. So what you see is what you get, but as you get closer, you're impressed in ways you would not be on, say, a Journe, a JLC, or an AP. Patek's still doing things the right way, although these are clearly watches made in greater volumes than, say, Aaron Beche and his 12 watches a year, or Philippe Dufour. There is still a lot of hand finishing, and happily, a lot of that is where you'll be able to see it on the bracelet and the case, where you can appreciate the handiwork of the people who finish these watches so skillfully. So reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.